History often remembers kings at their strongest, crowned, commanding, untouchable. But the most revealing moments come when power fails, when a ruler stands helpless before something no crown can control. In the early hours of an autumn night in 1537, England's most formidable monarch was brought to his knees, not by rebellion, not by war, but by a silent death inside his own palace. What followed was not merely grief. It was collapse. This is the story of the night Henry VIII broke, and of how the death of one woman unleashed the most dangerous transformation of his reign. Rewritten main text. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the Queen's breathing slowed, and then stopped. By the time dawn crept across Hampton Court Palace, the King of England had already fled, leaving behind her lifeless body. What followed would twist a powerful ruler into a fearful, suspicious tyrant. This was not just bereavement. It was the beginning of a descent. October 24th, 1537, Hampton Court Palace. This was the night that shattered Henry VIII and changed England forever. Just 12 days earlier, on October 12th, after 2 days and 3 agonizing nights of labor, Queen Jane Seymour had delivered what Henry had craved for nearly 3 decades, a living son. The boy, christened Edward, arrived into a kingdom holding its breath. Across London, church bells rang. Bonfires lit the night sky. Cannons thundered, 2,000 shots fired from the tower. England finally had an heir. But inside the birthing chamber, victory came at a terrible cost. Jane's labor had been brutal. The child's position made delivery nearly impossible, and Tudor medicine had little to offer beyond endurance and prayer. Though the physicians did what they could, unseen damage had already been done. Her body, exhausted, torn, and vulnerable, had become fertile ground for an enemy no one in 1537 understood. Infection. At first, there were signs of hope. Jane survived the birth. She was weak, but conscious. Plans were quietly made for her churching ceremony, the ritual marking a queen's return to public life after childbirth. Letters announcing the prince's birth were drafted for foreign courts. Henry visited her chambers, triumphant and relieved. This queen had succeeded where 2 others had failed. Then, on October 16th, for days after Edward's birth, Jane suddenly fell ill. Court records describe a violent laxity, severe diarrhea that physicians dismissed as food poisoning or a natural part of recovery. Remedies were given, comfort offered. They waited. They did not know they were watching sepsis tighten its grip. Modern historians believe retained placental tissue from the difficult delivery had allowed bacteria to multiply deep within her body. The infection spread silently. By the time symptoms appeared, the invasion was already underway. Within 3 days, it reached her bloodstream. Septic shock, an invisible killer that would remain untreatable for centuries, had begun its final work. Jane's temperature surged and crashed. Her heart raced, fighting collapsing vessels. One by one, her organs began to fail. The royal physicians gathered helplessly around her bed. They possessed authority, prestige, and confidence, but not the knowledge needed to save her. They bled her, dosed her with herbs, prayed fervently. None of it mattered. They were battling something they could neither see nor understand. Down the corridor, in a quiet chamber, baby Edward slept peacefully in his cradle. He would never remember his mother. He would never know that his birth had set in motion the chain of events that would kill her. The countdown had begun. Jane Seymour had 5 days left. Those days dragged cruelly for everyone but her. By October 20th, the truth was impossible to deny. The Queen of England was dying. Preparations for celebration vanished. Hampton Court fell silent. Courtiers whispered. Servants moved softly. Even the autumn air seemed to turn colder. Henry visited obsessively, watching helplessly as the woman who had given him everything slipped away. For a king who had bent nations and broken Rome itself, This powerlessness was unbearable. Death could not be commanded. It could not be negotiated with. Jane drifted in and out of consciousness. At times she spoke softly to those near her. At others, fever stole her words entirely. What Tudor physicians called childbed fever had won. In an age before antibiotics, before the very concept of bacteria, this was a death sentence. It killed methodically. It killed thousands. As midnight approached on October 24th, Jane's breathing became ragged. The women attending her recognized the signs immediately. Word spread through the palace. At 2 in the morning, Queen Jane Seymour died. She was 29 years old. She had been queen for 17 months. She had been a mother for 12 days. Chronicler Edward Hall later wrote that mourning for her death echoed across the realm, but noted that no one took it harder than the king himself. Hampton Court was draped in black. Candles flickered, prayers murmured. A palace that had celebrated a prince less than 2 weeks earlier became a house of mourning. Henry had chosen to divorce Catherine of Aragon. He had ordered Boleyn's execution. But Jane's death was different. He had not chosen this. He could not undo it. And the king, who lived in constant terror of illness and decay, now stood in a palace tainted by death itself. By sunrise, Henry VIII was gone. He did not supervise the laying out of Jane's body. He did not comfort her attendants. He fled Hampton Court as though death itself were chasing him, because in his mind, it was. Throughout his life, Henry had displayed an obsessive fear of mortality. During plague outbreaks, he abandoned London instantly, moving constantly to outrun infection. He could not tolerate sickness. Disease terrified him. Now death had entered his home. Records from the College of Heralds state that the king withdrew to a solitary place to pass his sorrows. He soon moved again, this time to Westminster, where chroniclers noted that he mourned close in secret a great while. Those words reveal everything. The most public man in England vanished from public life. Audiences were refused. Advisors shut out. One account states plainly that after Jane's death, the king would not be spoken to by anyone. The machinery of state continued without him. Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, organized the funeral. Thomas Cromwell managed the political fallout. Both had served Henry for years, but neither had ever seen him like this. The man who had ordered Boleyn's execution could not face Jane Seymour's body. This was not performance. This was collapse. On November 8th, London was ordered to hold 1,200 masses for Jane's soul, an unprecedented act. Henry himself wore deep mourning black for 3 months. Court mourning lasted until Easter of 1538. On November 12th, Jane was laid to rest at St. George's Chapel, Windsor. Her daughter-in-law Mary served as chief mourner. Jane's brothers stood in silence. Henry did not attend. Yet he made one final request. When his time came, he was to be buried beside Jane, and Jane alone. Something inside him had broken, and the man who emerged from that grief would be far more dangerous than the one who entered it. Every English monarch carried the weight of anxiety, but Henry's burden was unlike any before him. He had crowned himself supreme head of the Church of England, answerable to no pope, no emperor, no higher earthly authority. He had defied Rome, risked war with Catholic Europe, dismantled centuries-old monasteries, and reshaped the spiritual life of an entire nation to accommodate his marriages. Questions of legitimacy never left him. Had England chosen correctly? Had he gone too far? Those doubts stalked him constantly, even at moments of triumph. So when Jane Seymour died in October 1537, she did not leave behind merely a grieving husband. She left a man already unraveling, his brain injured, his body decaying, his pain relentless, his emotional reserves exhausted. Henry VIII was a powder keg. Jane's death was the spark. During those long, silent months at Westminster, something profoundly dangerous took root in Henry's mind. Alone in darkened chambers, Without counselors to challenge him or voices to ground him, he began to rewrite the past. The real Jane, complex, cautious, occasionally political, slowly disappeared. In her place emerged something unreal, the perfect queen, the flawless wife, the singular love of his life. The transformation was immediate. The moment Jane died, she became sacred, untouchable, beyond criticism. Every flaw vanished from memory. Had Jane once knelt before him during the pilgrimage of grace, begging mercy for rebels and pleading for the restoration of the monasteries? Yes, she had. Henry had responded with cold fury, reminding her that the last queen who meddled in politics had lost her head. It was one of the few moments Jane openly defied him. But in Henry's reconstructed reality, that moment never existed. Had she sympathized with Catholic traditions Henry was dismantling? Evidence suggests she did. The Seymour family leaned conservative. Jane herself favored traditional piety. Yet none of that survived in Henry's imagined version of her. His Jane was obedient, supportive, perfectly aligned with his will, whatever that will happen to be. This was not conscious deception. It was grief mutating into delusion. Psychologists today would call it complicated grief, a state in which loss becomes frozen, idealized, and inseparable from identity. The mourner does not heal. They build a shrine in their mind and live inside it. Jane possessed one quality that made this possible in a way no other wife ever could. She had given him Edward, the son, the heir, the child Henry had chased for nearly 30 years. That single fact elevated Jane beyond mortality. Catherine of Aragon had been divorced when she failed to produce a son, and Boleyn had been executed when she failed as well. Both could be blamed. Both could be rewritten as mistakes. But Jane had succeeded and then died doing so. She became blameless, perfect, sacrificial, and the guilt must have gnawed at Henry in those silent Westminster nights. His ambition demanded that pregnancy. His hunger for an heir placed her in that birthing bed. His desire for a son had killed the woman he now proclaimed as his greatest love. Celebrating Edward while mourning Jane created a fracture in Henry's mind that never healed. And a wounded, isolated king with absolute power is a terrifying thing. The paranoia did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, silent, and invisible, much like the infection that had killed Jane. By the early 1540s, courtiers noticed something alarming. Henry's moods became extreme, unpredictable, and genuinely frightening. One moment, he could be generous and jovial. The next, consumed by rage over imagined insults or perceived betrayal. Those closest to him learned to read his expressions, to sense danger before it erupted. A miscue could be fatal. Periods of deep depression followed, withdrawals eerily similar to his isolation after Jane's death. Then the darkness would lift, replaced by manic energy or sharp paranoia. The court lived in constant tension, never knowing which version of the king would emerge each morning. Thomas Cromwell learned this truth the hardest way. For over a decade, Cromwell had been Henry's indispensable servant, the architect of the break with Rome, the mastermind behind the dissolution of the monasteries, the man who solved impossible problems. But in 1539, he arranged Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves, hoping to secure Protestant alliances in Europe. Henry loathed the match. He found an unattractive. The marriage failed immediately. Unable or unwilling to consummate it, Henry felt humiliated. And humiliation demanded a scapegoat. On July 28, 1540, Thomas Cromwell was executed. The charges, treason, heresy, corruption, were convenient fiction. His real crime was displeasing the king at the worst possible moment. Years of loyalty evaporated in weeks. That same day, Henry married his fifth wife, the teenage Catherine Howard. Blood and celebration mingled grotesquely. Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, Henry's lifelong friend, watched all of this unfold. Even he tread carefully now. The king he had known in youth, charismatic, confident, generous, had transformed into something volatile. Every setback became conspiracy. Every illness hinted at poisoning. Every disagreement smelled of treason. Jane's death had not created this paranoia, but it had removed the last restraint. The violence escalated. By the end of his reign, Henry VIII would be responsible for roughly 57,000 deaths through executions, purges, and religious persecution, more than many wars of the age. But it was the pattern after Jane's death that revealed the true cost of his collapse. Catherine Howard would learn this too late. Barely 17, when Henry married her, she briefly revived him. He called her his rose without a thorn, lavishing her with jewels and affection. Youth distracted him from his rotting legs and fading vitality. Then rumors reached him. Whether Catherine committed adultery or merely behaved carelessly remains debated. What matters is Henry's reaction. Witnesses described him as consumed by uncontrollable rage. He refused ever to see her again. On February 13th, 1542, Catherine Howard was executed on Tower Green, the same spot wherein Boleyn had died 6 years earlier. Two queens, same charge, same fate. Between those executions lay Jane Seymour's death, the moment when restraint vanished. Once Henry crossed the line of executing an anointed queen, it became easier each time. Every boundary broken normalized the next atrocity. The moral framework that might have restrained an earlier king had been dismantled piece by piece. And it wasn't only wives. Nobles, clergy, advisors, entire families fell. The pilgrimage of grace ended in mass executions. Mercy disappeared. Fear replaced loyalty. Henry VIII had become something monstrous. And always, hovering over every decision, was the ghost of Jane Seymour, perfect, untouchable, impossible to match. What made Henry's collapse uniquely catastrophic was his power. He was not just king, he was supreme spiritual authority. The act of supremacy placed all religious and political power in his hands. There was no pope to appeal to, no higher court, no moral referee. Before Jane's death, Henry wielded this power strategically. After her death, fractured by grief and illness, it became arbitrary and lethal. He could legitimize or bastardize his daughters on a whim, rewrite marriage law retroactively, declare doctrine by personal decree, dissolve institutions older than his dynasty. And no one could stop him. Unable to control death, decay, or his own failing body, Henry controlled everything else with desperation. Every disagreement became treason. Every dissent became heresy. England did not merely have a grieving king. It had a grieving king with absolute power and a deteriorating mind. And the realm lived knowing that any day, any mood could become a death sentence. If you're ready, send the next piece, and I'll continue seamlessly in the same tone and rhythm. By 1539, Thomas Cromwell believed he had found a solution that served England's survival rather than Henry's emotions. Anne of Cleves, sister to a powerful German duke, offered a crucial Protestant alliance at a moment when Catholic Europe was watching England with hostility. A portrait was commissioned, and Hans Holbein painted and as diplomatically as possible, composed, dignified, and appealing enough to inspire hope. But when Henry met her on January 1st, 1540, that hope collapsed instantly. The woman before him did not resemble the fantasy he had constructed. He found her plain, awkward, lacking the spark he demanded. Yet the machinery of politics had already moved too far. Contracts were signed. Retreat would humiliate the crown and fracture alliances. Henry married her anyway. The marriage failed immediately. The wedding night was an embarrassment. Whether the cause was Anne's appearance, Henry's declining health, or the psychological damage left by grief and injury, he could not consummate the union. For a king who had reshaped England to secure remarriage, This humiliation was unbearable. 6 months later, the marriage was annulled. On July 9th, 1540, Anne of Cleves was dismissed, and on that same day, Henry married his fifth wife, the teenage Catherine Howard. The pattern was unmistakable. Henry was not seeking companionship. He was chasing an illusion. The Jane Seymour he longed for was no longer real. She had become a ghost, perfect, obedient, untouchable. No living woman could compete with that standard. And disappointment by now was lethal. From 1537 until his death in 1547, Henry's life became a study in relentless decline. His body deteriorated grotesquely. His waist expanded beyond 50 inches. His weight approached 400 pounds. Open ulcers in his legs festered constantly, emitting a stench no perfume could fully conceal. He could no longer climb stairs unaided. The athletic prince of his youth was gone, replaced by a man imprisoned inside pain and decay. His mental decline was even more destructive. Mood swings sharpened into volatility. Paranoia deepened. Violence became instinctive. By the mid-1540s, men were executed for whispered dissent, minor theological disagreement, or association with the wrong person. Fear defined court life. Jane's absence hovered over everything. Henry never stopped mourning her. Every wife was compared to the impossible phantom he had created. His final wife, Catherine Parr, survived largely by acting as a caretaker rather than a partner, managing his health and avoiding political conflict. Then came the final irony. Edward, the son Jane had died to deliver, succeeded Henry in 1547 at just 9 years old. The heir Henry had sacrificed everything to obtain was fragile from birth. In 1553, at 15, Edward VI died, likely of tuberculosis. 6 years. That was all his reign lasted. The succession crisis Henry had feared arrived anyway. England fell back into instability, forcing his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, alternately legitimized and rejected by their father, to repair the damage. Mary ruled with severity shaped by trauma. Elizabeth, forged in the shadow of tyranny and execution, would rise into greatness, but only after surviving her childhood. Historians still debate what destroyed Henry VIII. A traumatic brain injury in 1536. Chronic pain that rewired his temperament. Undiagnosed diabetes ravaging his body. Absolute power without restraint. Or the unprocessed grief after Jane's death. The truth is simpler and darker. All of it converged at once. Henry never recovered from October 1537. Something fractured that night and could not be repaired. And England spent the next decade living with the consequences of a king's collapse. Contemporary chroniclers noticed. Edward Hall wrote that mourning for Jane was heard across the realm, but that no one took her death harder than the king himself. He noted Henry withdrew completely, keeping himself close and secret. Official records confirm the same. This was not performance. It was breakdown. Modern medicine helps explain what Tudor physicians could not. 2 hours of unconsciousness in 1536 points to severe brain injury, one that disrupts emotional regulation, judgment, and impulse control. Chronic pain alters brain chemistry. Uncontrolled diabetes damages cognition. Combined with lifelong stress and isolation, Henry became a man unraveling while wielding absolute authority. There's a legend that Jane Seymour's ghost walks Hampton Court, candle in hand. But the real haunting was psychological. Henry spent the rest of his life pursued by a woman who no longer existed, an idealized memory he refused to release. No wife could measure up. No relationship could survive it. In the end, Henry made one final choice that revealed everything. He asked to be buried beside Jane Seymour. Not Catherine of Aragon, not in Bullen, only Jane. When Henry VIII died on January 28, 1547, his wish was honored. He was laid to rest beside her in Windsor, beneath St. George's Chapel. A king who ruled England for nearly 4 decades. A queen who ruled his heart for 17 months. Jane Seymour did not simply die giving birth to a son. In dying, she destroyed the king who survived her.